people behind you. Turn around, hands on the car. I am FBI, Supervisory Special Agent. This is my home. Don't talk back. I said back around. You're interfering with a federal operation.
At 6:07 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday morning in Fairfax County, Virginia, FBI Supervisory Special Agent Darnell Sutton stepped out of his front door and into the cool air of a neighborhood that was still asleep. He was 44 years old, a 19-year veteran of the Bureau, and one of the most respected counterterrorism specialists operating out of the Hoover Building in Washington. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his FBI credentials secured in a leather case on his hip beside his service weapon. In his right hand, he carried a briefcase containing classified briefing materials for a 9 a.m. meeting with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. His posture was straight, his movements deliberate, the kind of discipline that came from nearly 2 decades in federal law enforcement. Inside the house behind him, his wife, Dr. Vanessa Sutton, a neurologist at Georgetown University Hospital, stood at the kitchen window watching him walk to the driveway. Their 2 children sat at the table behind her, 9-year-old Elijah eating cereal, and 12-year-old Nadia scrolling through her phone before school. It was an ordinary morning, routine, predictable, the kind of morning that didn't make the news. Darnell placed his briefcase in the back seat of his government-issued black Dodge Charger and paused to check his phone. A message from his deputy confirmed the briefing was on schedule. He typed a short reply, slid the phone into his jacket pocket, and reached for the driver's side door. He did not notice the 2 unmarked white SUVs idling at the far end of the cul-de-sac. He did not see the 6 figures seated inside them wearing tactical vests. And he had no way of knowing that the next 11 minutes would dismantle careers, trigger a federal firestorm, and expose a rot inside one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the country. The man behind the wheel of the lead SUV was ICE Enforcement and Removal Operations Senior Agent Victor Briggs. He was 46 years old with 16 years on the job and a reputation inside his field office that supervisors described as aggressive but effective. What that label actually meant was that Briggs ran operations with minimal paperwork, thin probable cause, and a heavy hand. Colleagues who had worked under him used a different term. They called them cowboy operations. Fast-moving, warrant-light raids through residential neighborhoods where Briggs made decisions on instinct rather than intelligence and justified them in the reports afterward. His personnel file carried 7 formal complaints of excessive force filed over the past decade. Not one had resulted in discipline. Each had been reviewed internally and closed with language like unsubstantiated or insufficient evidence to proceed. The kind of phrases that allowed a pattern to continue without anyone taking responsibility for what it meant. His second-in-command, Agent Dale Fenton, 38, sat in the passenger seat beside him. Fenton had been partnered with Briggs for 5 years and had absorbed his methods without resistance. He didn't challenge calls. He didn't ask questions. He followed Briggs's lead the way someone follows a current, without thinking about where it ends. Behind them, 4 additional agents sat in the second vehicle, geared up and waiting for Briggs's signal. The operation that morning was supposed to target an undocumented individual allegedly residing on this street. But the intelligence was flawed. The address on file didn't match any house on the block. A careful agent would have paused, would have verified, would have called it in and regrouped. Briggs did none of that. Instead, he scanned the cul-de-sac through the windshield and made a decision that would end his career. When he saw a black man standing in a driveway in this predominantly white neighborhood, he straightened in his seat. That's our guy. Fenton didn't question it. He never did. The 2 SUVs accelerated up the cul-de-sac without warning, engines breaking the morning silence as they swung hard into position on either side of Darnell's driveway. The first blocked the street end. The second angled across the mouth of the drive, pinning the Charger in place. Doors flew open. 6 agents stepped out in tactical vests stamped with 3 white letters across the chest. ICE. They moved with the urgency of a raid team hitting a confirmed target, spreading across the driveway in a loose formation, hands near their weapons, eyes locked on one man. Darnell turned from his car door and took in the scene in less than 2 seconds. The vests, the posture, the positioning. 19 years of federal training processed the situation before a single word was spoken. He did not reach for his sidearm. He did not step back. He kept his hands open and visible at his sides. Senior Agent Victor Briggs led the approach, his right hand resting on the grip of his holstered weapon, his stride fast and aggressive. He stopped 4 feet from Darnell and looked him up and down. The suit, the tie, the government vehicle, the leather credential case on his hip, none of it registered. Or rather, none of it mattered. Darnell spoke first, his voice calm and clear. "I'm a federal agent, FBI. My credentials are right here on my belt." Briggs didn't look at the credentials. He didn't glance at the Charger's federal plates. He didn't pause. "I need to see your immigration documents." Darnell held his gaze. "I'm a United States citizen. I am a supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is my home." Briggs shifted his weight forward, closing the distance to less than 3 feet. "I'll decide what you are. Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle." Fenton moved to Darnell's left side, his hand mirroring Briggs' position on his own weapon. The other 4 agents fanned out across the driveway in a perimeter, treating the quiet suburban street like an active threat zone. Across the cul-de-sac, front doors began to open. A woman in a robe stepped onto her porch. A man in running clothes stopped at the end of his walkway. The neighborhood was waking up to something none of them had ever seen on their street before. Darnell did not turn around. He kept his hands open, his arms slightly away from his sides, palms visible. Every movement was controlled, deliberate, the practiced stillness of a man who understood how fast situations like this could spiral and who refused to give anyone a reason to escalate. He spoke again, his voice steady and measured. "I am FBI. My credentials are on my hip. My badge and ID are right here. I am asking you to verify my identity before this goes any further." Briggs's expression didn't change. He looked at the credential case the way someone glances at a piece of clothing they've already dismissed. Credentials can be faked. You people buy that stuff online. The words hung in the morning air. Darnell's jaw tightened. A muscle in his neck moved. But his voice remained level. "I want your name, your badge number, and I want to see a warrant." Briggs tilted his head slightly, the way someone does when they've decided the conversation is over. "We don't need a warrant. We have authority." Darnell's tone dropped, still calm, but with an edge of precision that came from years of conducting interrogations on the other side of the table. "You don't have authority to detain a federal officer in his own driveway without cause, and you know that." Something shifted behind Briggs's eyes. Not doubt, not reconsideration. Anger. The kind that came from a man who was not used to being challenged. Especially not by someone he had already decided didn't have the right to challenge him. It happened fast. Briggs grabbed Darnell's left arm and wrenched it behind his back. Fenton seized the right. Darnell did not pull away, did not twist, did not resist in any way that could later be described as aggressive. His voice rose just enough for every neighbor now standing on their porch to hear. "I am not resisting. I am FBI. You are making a mistake." Briggs drove Darnell forward and slammed him face first into the hood of his own government-issued Charger. The sound of his forehead hitting the black metal was sharp and immediate, loud enough to echo off the houses across the street. A woman gasped. Someone shouted. And inside the house, a 9-year-old boy who had been eating cereal dropped his spoon and ran toward the sound of his father's voice. Dr. Vanessa Sutton heard the impact before she understood what it was. A sharp metallic sound followed by raised voices that didn't belong on her street at 6 in the morning. She had been standing at the kitchen sink rinsing a coffee mug when the noise pulled her to the window. What she saw through the glass made her drop the mug into the basin. Her husband was pinned face down against the hood of his own car. 6 armed men in tactical vests surrounded him. 2 of them had his arms twisted behind his back. She screamed. The sound cut through the kitchen and reached both children instantly. Elijah, 9 years old, pushed back from the breakfast table and ran toward the front of the house, cereal forgotten. Nadia, 12, moved on instinct sharpened by a generation raised on camera phones. She grabbed her phone from the counter and ran upstairs to her bedroom window, pressed record, and held the frame steady on the driveway below. Vanessa was already out the front door, barefoot on the cold concrete of the porch steps, moving toward the driveway with her hands open and her voice high. "What are you doing? That's my husband! What is happening?" Briggs didn't turn his body. He turned only his head, keeping one hand on Darnell's back, and spoke with the flat condescension of a man addressing someone he considered irrelevant. "Ma'am, go back inside. This is a federal operation." Vanessa didn't stop. She moved closer, her voice breaking, but her words sharp. "I am Dr. Vanessa Sutton. I am a neurologist at Georgetown University Hospital. That man is my husband. He is an FBI supervisory special agent. His credentials are on his hip. What are you doing to him?" Fenton stepped forward, positioning himself between Vanessa and the car. His hand rested on his belt. His tone carried a threat he didn't bother to disguise. "Ma'am, you are interfering with a federal operation. Step back now, or you will be placed under arrest." Vanessa froze. Behind her, Elijah appeared in the doorway. His face was red and wet with tears. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching his father's cheek pressed against the hood of the car and the men with guns standing over him. Across the street, a front door opened slowly. Colonel Howard Pratt, 67, retired United States Marine Corps, stepped onto his porch in a bathrobe and slippers. He took one long look at the driveway, reached into his pocket, and pulled out his phone. Colonel Pratt had lived on this street for 12 years. He had known Darnell Sutton for 8 of them. They had shared dinners, their children had played together. He had seen Darnell leave for work in that same Charger hundreds of times, credentials on his hip, briefcase in hand. He did not need to be told what he was looking at. He knew, and what he saw was wrong. Pratt walked across the street with the unhurried pace of a man who had spent decades walking into situations others walked away from. His bathrobe hung open. His slippers scuffed the asphalt. His phone was raised and recording. He stopped at the edge of the driveway and spoke directly to Briggs, his voice carrying the kind of authority that didn't come from a badge, but from 30 years of military command. "That man is FBI. I've seen his credentials with my own eyes. I've sat at his dinner table. You are making a very serious error." Briggs looked at him the way he looked at everyone who challenged him, with contempt framed as authority. "Sir, go back to your house. Now. Unless you want to be charged with obstruction of a federal operation." Pratt didn't move, not a single step. "I am a retired colonel in the United States Marine Corps. I am not going anywhere. And you just threatened a man's wife in front of his children on his own property." Down the street, 2 more doors opened. A woman in scrubs stepped onto her porch, phone already recording. A man in a polo shirt stood at the end of his driveway with his cell to his ear, speaking quickly to a 911 dispatcher. "Yes, there are armed men in tactical vests. They've pinned a man against his car. His wife is outside screaming. There are children. Please send someone now." Briggs scanned the growing audience. 5 houses had eyes on him now. 3 phones were recording. A 911 call was live. The situation was expanding beyond his control, and every second brought more witnesses. But Victor Briggs had never once in 16 years backed down from a decision he had already made. He was not going to start now. He looked at Fenton and nodded once. "Cuff him." Fenton pulled the handcuffs from his belt and locked them around Darnell's wrists. The click was quiet, almost mechanical, but the weight of it carried across the entire cul-de-sac. Darnell Sutton now stood handcuffed, leaning against his own government-issued vehicle, his FBI badge clearly visible on his belt, his credentials still in the case at his hip, in front of his own home, while his son sobbed in the doorway, and his daughter recorded every second from the window above. Colonel Pratt's voice cut across the driveway like a battlefield command. "Check his identification. You have a man in cuffs and you haven't looked at the credentials on his hip?" Briggs didn't acknowledge him. He was repositioning Darnell toward the SUV when a voice from his own team stopped him. "Victor, maybe we should look at his ID." Agent Luisa Vega, 33, the youngest on the team and the only one who hadn't touched Darnell, stepped forward. Briggs turned, his expression hard. I run this operation. Vega didn't argue. She moved past him, reached for the leather credential case on Darnell's hip, and unsnapped it. The gold FBI shield caught the morning light. She unfolded the identification card beneath it. Darnell Sutton, Supervisory Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Counterterrorism Division. She held the case open toward Briggs. The color drained from her face. Briggs stared at the badge. 1 second, 2, 3. The cul-de-sac was silent except for the quiet sobs of a 9-year-old boy in the doorway. Then Briggs spoke, and the words that left his mouth would be replayed in federal courtrooms and national broadcasts for months. Could be fake. We're bringing him in for verification. Vega stepped back. Her hand dropped to her side. Fenton shifted his weight, looked at the badge, looked at Briggs, looked at the ground. He said nothing. Pratt's voice rose. You just saw his badge. What more do you need? Briggs turned away. Get him in the vehicle. 2 agents took Darnell's arms. He didn't resist. He planted his feet only long enough to speak directly to Briggs, his voice low and precise. You are abducting a federal officer from his own property without a warrant. Every one of you is going to answer for this. Briggs said nothing. They guided Darnell toward the SUV. His daughter's camera followed every step from the window above. Inside the house, Dr. Vanessa Sutton stood with her back against the kitchen counter, phone pressed to her ear, hands shaking. She had dialed the FBI's Washington field office from memory, the emergency number Darnell told her to use only if something went wrong. My husband is Supervisory Special Agent Darnell Sutton, badge number 7741, Counterterrorism Division, Hoover Building. ICE agents detained him in our driveway. He showed his credentials. They don't care. They're putting him in a vehicle right now. A pause. Then the duty officer's tone changed completely. The casual professionalism vanished, replaced by something tight and urgent. Ma'am, did you say Supervisory Special Agent Sutton? Counterterrorism? Yes. Do not hang up. She heard rapid movement on the line, chair shifting, a door closing, a second voice she couldn't make out. 4 minutes later, the FBI's Assistant Director for Counterterrorism was woken at his home in Arlington. He was briefed in under 60 seconds. 6 minutes after that, the director's office was alerted. The incident was flagged as a priority interagency matter involving the unlawful detention of a senior bureau agent by another federal agency. 8 minutes after Vanessa's call, a direct line connected FBI headquarters to ICE's Office of Professional Responsibility. The message was 4 sentences. You have one of our supervisory special agents in handcuffs. He was detained without a warrant at his own residence. He identified himself and you ignored it. Fix this now or we will come fix it ourselves. Meanwhile, Pratt had called the retired 2-star general at the Pentagon. Nadia's video had been texted to her aunt, who forwarded it to 3 more people before the SUV pulled away. 9 neighbors stood outside. 4 phones were recording. A 911 call was logged with Fairfax County Dispatch. And Victor Briggs, driving toward the field office with a cuffed FBI counterterrorism agent in his back seat, had no idea what was cascading above him. Briggs was 3 miles from the field office when his radio crackled. The voice on the other end wasn't a dispatcher. It was ICE Field Director Salazar, and the controlled fury in his tone was unmistakable. Briggs, this is Field Director Salazar. Release the individual immediately. Do not transport. Uncuff him now. Confirm receipt. Briggs gripped the steering wheel tighter. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror where Darnell sat in silence, wrists cuffed behind his back, posture straight, expression unreadable. Fenton shifted in the passenger seat, his hand frozen halfway to the radio. Briggs keyed the mic. Sir, we have a situation here that requires... I said release him now, Agent Briggs. That is a direct order. You have detained a supervisory special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Uncuff him, return his belongings, and do not move from that location until I arrive. Do you copy? The radio went silent. Briggs pulled the SUV to the curb on a residential side street 4 blocks from the cul-de-sac. He sat there for a long moment, engine idling, both hands on the wheel. Fenton stared at the dashboard. Neither spoke. In the back seat, Darnell said nothing. He didn't need to. The 2 agents in the trail vehicle pulled up behind them and waited. Briggs finally stepped out, walked to the rear door, and opened it. He unlocked the cuffs without making eye contact. The metal fell away from Darnell's wrists. Darnell stepped onto the sidewalk, rolled his shoulders, and flexed his hands. Red lines circled both wrists where the cuffs had bitten into his skin. He looked at Briggs for a long moment. His voice was quiet, steady, and final. "You had every chance to stop this." Briggs said nothing. He couldn't, because somewhere behind those words was the sound of a career ending, and for the first time that morning, he could hear it. Briggs drove Darnell back to the cul-de-sac in silence. When the SUV pulled into the street, 9 neighbors were still outside. 4 phones were still recording. Vanessa was standing in the driveway with her arms wrapped around herself, Elijah pressed against her leg. Nadia was still at the window. Darnell stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward his family. Vanessa reached him first. She grabbed the front of his jacket with both hands and held on, her forehead pressed against his chest, her body shaking. He wrapped his arms around her and looked over her shoulder at Elijah, whose face was swollen and red. "It's okay. Daddy's okay." It wasn't okay. His forehead carried a bruise from the hood of the Charger. His suit jacket was torn at the shoulder seam. His wrists were marked. His children had watched armed men slam their father against his own car and drag him away in handcuffs. No amount of calm could undo what they had seen. Vega approached from the second vehicle. She stopped a few feet away, her voice low. "I'm sorry. I should have stopped it sooner." Darnell looked at her. "You saw the badge and he still wanted to take me in? You know what this was." Vega didn't answer. She didn't have to. Within 30 minutes, ICE Field Director Salazar arrived with 2 internal affairs investigators. FBI sent 3 representatives, including a legal attaché from the Washington field office. Fairfax County Police responded to the earlier 911 calls. The quiet cul-de-sac became a jurisdictional collision of agencies, badges, and competing authority. Salazar pulled Briggs and Fenton aside near the trail vehicle. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. No one could hear the words, but everyone saw the result. Briggs' face went white. Both agents removed their badges and surrendered their service weapons on the spot. It was 6:53 a.m. The entire encounter had lasted less than 12 minutes. By noon, the case had detonated across 3 simultaneous tracks. The FBI's Inspection Division opened a formal inquiry into the assault and unlawful detention of one of their own agents. ICE's Office of Professional Responsibility launched a misconduct investigation into Briggs, Fenton, and the operational chain that had authorized the morning's action. And the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a federal civil rights investigation into racial profiling, excessive force, and unlawful seizure of a person without warrant or probable cause. Briggs's operational file was pulled within the first hour. What investigators found confirmed what everyone on that driveway already knew. The operation had no warrant, no probable cause, no supervisor sign-off for a residential sweep. The target address listed in the intelligence packet didn't match any house on the block. The entire basis for the stop was Briggs' decision to approach a black man standing in his own driveway in a white neighborhood. Body camera footage from Agent Vega's chest-mounted unit captured the full encounter. Briggs' voice saying, "I'll decide what you are." The phrase, "You people buy that stuff online." The refusal to examine credentials. The slam against the hood. Vanessa's screams. Fenton's threat to arrest her. Elijah crying in the doorway. Every second, every word, every failure preserved in high-definition federal evidence. Internal emails surfaced showing Briggs had been flagged twice in the previous 3 years for conducting warrantless stops of minorities in residential areas. Both times, supervisors reviewed the complaints and declined to act, citing insufficient evidence and operational discretion. Fenton's file revealed he had been Briggs's partner on every single flagged operation. Not once had he intervened. Not once had he filed a contradicting report. That afternoon, the FBI director placed a call to the Secretary of Homeland Security. Sources who were briefed on the conversation described it as the angriest interagency call in recent memory. The director's message was simple: this will not be handled quietly. A federal grand jury was convened in the Eastern District of Virginia within 3 weeks. The speed was unusual. The reason was not. Prosecutors presented the case with methodical precision. Vega's body camera footage played first. The grand jury watched Briggs approach, heard the language, saw the slam, heard the children. Several jurors shifted in their seats. Nadia's phone video played next, showing the scene from above. 6 agents surrounding one man in a suit in his own driveway, a boy crying in the doorway, a woman in a bathrobe being threatened with arrest. 7 neighbors testified. Each account aligned with the footage. Each confirmed that Darnell had been calm, compliant, and clearly identified himself multiple times before force was used. Colonel Pratt took the stand in a pressed blazer with his service ribbons pinned to the breast pocket. His testimony was direct and unshakable. I have known that man for 8 years. I have seen his FBI credentials. I watched 6 armed agents slam him into his own car after he told them who he was. And when his badge was opened in front of their team leader, the man looked at it and said it could be fake. That is not law enforcement. That is something else entirely. Darnell testified last. He recounted every detail with the controlled precision of a man trained to deliver intelligence briefings under pressure. The words, the grab, the slam, the cuffs, his son's face. He said quietly, "I have spent 19 years protecting this country from threats. I never expected the threat to come from another federal badge in my own driveway." The grand jury returned indictments on all targets. Briggs was charged with deprivation of civil rights under color of law, unlawful detention, assault on a federal officer, and conspiracy. Fenton was charged with aiding unlawful detention, failure to intervene, and conspiracy. Briggs's sergeant, who had approved the operation without verifying the address, was indicted on conspiracy charges. All 3 were denied bail. The trial opened before federal judge Diane Holloway in the Eastern District of Virginia. The courtroom was standing room only. Federal agents from both agencies sat in the gallery alongside civil rights attorneys, journalists, and members of Congress who had requested observer seats. Prosecutors played Vega's body camera footage first. The screen mounted above the jury box showed Briggs approaching the driveway, his hand on his weapon, his voice already carrying the tone of a man who had made his decision before he arrived. The jury watched him ignore Darnell's identification, heard him say, "You people," watched Darnell's face hit the hood, heard Elijah crying from inside the house. 2 jurors looked away. One pressed a hand to her mouth. Nadia's video played next. The elevated angle from the bedroom window showed the full scope of the scene. 6 armed agents surrounding a single man in a suit. A woman being threatened on her own front steps. A child frozen in a doorway. Neighbors testified one by one. Their accounts were consistent because the truth doesn't need coordination. Pratt testified in a dark suit with his service medals. His voice never wavered. Agent Vega took the stand and testified against Briggs directly, describing his pattern of racial targeting and her attempt to check the credentials he refused to examine. Briggs' defense argued good faith belief in the operation. Prosecutors dismantled it in minutes. The target address didn't exist on that street. Briggs never verified it. There was no warrant, no probable cause, no legal basis for any of it. The defense tried to characterize Darnell's composure as non-compliant body language. Judge Holloway interrupted from the bench. Standing still and identifying yourself is not non-compliance. Move on. Fenton's attorney attempted to portray him as a follower acting under orders. Prosecutors countered simply. Silence in the face of a civil rights violation is participation. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. Guilty on all counts. Both men. Every charge. Judge Holloway delivered sentencing 6 weeks later, in a courtroom that was once again filled beyond capacity. She read her statement without looking up for the first 4 minutes, her voice measured and deliberate, each sentence landing with the weight of someone who understood exactly what she was putting into the public record. What happened on that driveway was not a misunderstanding. It was not a procedural error. It was a grotesque abuse of federal authority, compounded by racial animus, carried out in front of children, on American soil, against a man who has given nearly 2 decades of service to this nation. She looked up. The system failed Supervisory Special Agent Sutton that morning. It failed his wife. It failed his children. It failed every citizen who trusts that a badge means protection and not persecution. Briggs received 7 years in federal prison. Fenton received 4. The sergeant who approved the operation without verifying the address received 2. All 3 were permanently barred from federal employment. Their law enforcement certifications were revoked. ICE's Enforcement and Removal Operations Division was placed under a federal consent decree requiring independent oversight of all residential field operations. 6 supervisors who had ignored prior complaints about Briggs were disciplined. 2 were terminated. 3 were demoted. 1 took early retirement. DHS issued a formal apology to the Sutton family. The FBI director released a public statement calling the arrest an attack on the Bureau itself and on the dignity of every agent who serves. Darnell filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against ICE, DHS, Briggs, Fenton, and the supervisory chain. The case settled before trial for $4.7 million, plus sweeping policy reforms including mandatory address verification for all residential operations, warrant requirements for all approaches, and a racial bias auditing program with independent civilian review. The money was secondary. The record was permanent. Months later, Darnell Sutton walked through the lobby of the Hoover Building at 8:47 a.m., credentials on his hip, briefcase in hand, the same as every morning before. But when he stepped into the Counterterrorism Division's bullpen, the room went quiet. Then someone near the back started clapping. One person. Then another. Then the entire floor. Darnell stood still for a moment, nodded once, and walked to his desk. He never spoke about the incident publicly. He declined every interview request, every podcast invitation, every cable news appearance. But in a closed-door address to a class of new FBI recruits at Quantico 3 months after the sentencing, he said something that would be quoted in training materials for years. The badge doesn't make you right. The warrant doesn't make you just. Your conduct does. And if the system fails, the people around you, your neighbors, your family, the ones filming from the window, they become the system. Nadia's video, posted by a family member the week after the incident, reached 11 million views. The comments numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Colonel Pratt was interviewed by a national news outlet on his front porch, still in the same bathrobe. He said simply, "I've fought in 2 wars. I know what abuse of power looks like. I saw it that morning, standing in my slippers." Dr. Vanessa Sutton used a portion of the settlement to establish a legal defense fund for families targeted by warrantless immigration enforcement operations. The fund provided attorneys, documentation assistance, and emergency support for households who had no resources to fight back when armed men showed up at their doors without cause. Elijah, now 10, asked his father one evening while they sat on the back porch, "Dad, are you still proud to carry a badge?" Darnell looked at him for a long moment. The bruise on his forehead had healed months ago. The marks on his wrists were gone. But his son's face in that doorway, red and wet and frozen with fear, that image would never leave. "I'm proud of what the badge is supposed to mean, and I'll spend the rest of my career making sure it means that." Back in Fairfax County, the cul-de-sac was quiet again. The Charger sat in the driveway. The porch light was on. And somewhere in a federal records archive, next to the names Briggs and Fenton, a single word was stamped in red ink. Revoked. Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you, right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, a lot of you have told me you're waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. and just lying there. Can't shut your mind off. And the next day, you're dragging through everything. I came across a simple 21-day sleep guide that's helped thousands of people fix exactly that. No pills, no apps, no gadgets, just a step-by-step plan that actually works. It's only $15. I put the link in the description if you want to check it out. All right, I'll catch you in the next one.
You expect me to believe you live here?
Yes, this is my house. My ID is in my back pocket.
Yeah? Funny how nobody around here knows you.
I just moved in this morning.
You don't just move in here, not without someone noticing.
My daughter is inside. She's
Then maybe you should have thought about that before trying.
At 11:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning in the gated community of Prescott Ridge, a white woman dialed 911 and reported a break-in in progress. She described the suspect as a black female, acting erratic, possibly armed, moving boxes out of a residence on Wyndham Lane. She used the phrase, "she doesn't belong here," twice during the call. Police arrived 7 minutes later with lights, sirens, and weapons drawn. The woman they surrounded on the front lawn was not a burglar. She was Judge Denise Ayanna Carter, newly appointed to the United States District Court for the Western District of North Carolina, confirmed by the Senate just 3 weeks earlier. She was carrying a box of her daughter's books. Her 10-year-old, Naomi, was watching from inside the house through the living room window. Within minutes, Denise was face down on her own freshly laid sod, wrists cuffed behind her back, a knee pressed into her spine, while her daughter screamed from behind the glass. The 911 caller watched from her porch with her arms crossed. She never flinched. What none of them knew yet, not the caller, not the officers, not the HOA president who had quietly made this neighborhood her personal checkpoint, was that within 72 hours, federal investigators would be pulling phone records, body cam footage, and HOA emails. Careers would be destroyed, criminal charges would be filed, and the woman they had just put on the ground would be sitting on the federal bench, presiding over the very type of case they had just created. Prescott Ridge sat 6 miles outside Charlotte, North Carolina, behind a stone wall and a wrought iron gate that opened only with a resident code or a guard's approval. The home started at $1.2 million. The lawns were edged weekly by contracted crews who were let in through the service entrance and expected to leave by 4 p.m. There was a clubhouse, a private pool, and a quarterly newsletter that featured recipes, landscaping tips, and reminders about community standards. On paper, it was one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the region. In practice, it had never had a black homeowner. Not once in 26 years. That wasn't an accident. It was a culture. The Homeowners Association, led by its long-serving president Karen Langford, 58, a retired real estate broker with a firm smile and a tighter grip on the neighborhood than any board member before her, had spent years building an invisible fence far more effective than the iron one at the entrance. Under her leadership, police had been called to Prescott Ridge 14 times in the past 3 years for suspicious individuals. Every single one involved a person of color. A black landscaper was questioned for 25 minutes while his white employer watched from her porch without saying a word. A Latino delivery driver was followed by a resident in an SUV from the gate to his stop and back again. A black real estate agent showing a listing to a qualified buyer was held at the gate for 40 minutes while Karen personally called the listing office to verify authorization. None of these incidents were ever formally reported. None were challenged. No one filed a complaint because no one in Prescott Ridge saw a problem. That was the neighborhood Judge Denise Ayanna Carter had just moved into, and it was the neighborhood that was about to learn what happens when the person you try to push out has the full weight of the federal government behind her. Denise Ayanna Carter was not born into the world that Prescott Ridge represented. She grew up in Sandtown, Winchester, one of Baltimore's poorest neighborhoods, in a 2-bedroom apartment with her mother Gloria and 2 younger siblings. Gloria worked double shifts as a hospital custodian and still couldn't always make rent. There were nights the power went out. There were weeks groceries ran thin. But Gloria Carter had one rule that never bent. You will study. You will read. You will become something they can't take from you. Denise listened. She graduated valedictorian from a public high school with a crumbling gymnasium and no AP courses. A full scholarship took her to Spelman College. Another took her to Howard University's School of Law, where she graduated top of her class. She clerked for a federal appellate judge on the Fourth Circuit, then joined the Department of Justice as a civil rights prosecutor. For 12 years, she built cases against police departments that profiled, brutalized, and discriminated. She prosecuted officers who used badges as weapons. She sued housing authorities that redlined black families out of neighborhoods exactly like Prescott Ridge. She knew the law. She knew the patterns. She knew how power worked when no one was watching. When the president nominated her to the federal bench, she became one of the youngest black women ever appointed to a U.S. district court. The Senate confirmed her, 58-42. She purchased the house on Windham Lane because she wanted her daughter, Naomi, to grow up somewhere safe, with good schools and open space. That Saturday morning, wearing jeans and a Howard University sweatshirt, she carried boxes from a moving truck into her new home. She had no idea her neighbor was already watching. Karen Langford had seen the moving truck pull onto Windham Lane at 9:15 a.m. She noticed it from her kitchen window while pouring her second cup of coffee. When a black woman stepped out of the cab and began unloading boxes, Karen set the cup down and didn't pick it up again. She watched for 20 minutes. She studied the woman's movements, the way she walked back and forth between the truck and the front door, the way she paused on the porch and looked around. To anyone else, it was a person moving into a new home. To Karen, it was a threat. She picked up her phone and called Linda Greaves, 2 houses down. Did you know someone was moving into the Windham house? Linda didn't. Karen called Paul Fenton across the street. Same answer. No one had heard. No one had been told. In Karen's mind, that absence of information was confirmation enough. She had told 3 different neighbors over the past month that she hoped the Windham property would go to the right kind of family. She never defined what that meant. She never had to. At 11:38 a.m., Karen dialed 911. The transcript would later be entered into federal evidence. There's a black woman at 4912 Windham Lane. She's going in and out of the house. I don't think she lives here. She's acting erratic, looking around like she's casing the place. I think she might be armed. I saw something in her waistband. She doesn't belong here. The object in Denise's waistband was a tape measure she had tucked there while measuring the front door frame for a new screen door. Karen used the phrase, "she doesn't belong here," twice during the call. The dispatcher classified it as a burglary in progress with a possibly armed suspect. 2 patrol units were sent, lights and sirens. Officer Wade Prescott was 43 years old with 18 years on the force and a personnel file thick enough to warrant its own drawer. 7 complaints of excessive force. 3 allegations of racially biased stops. All dismissed. All buried under internal review processes that treated civilian complaints like paperwork to be filed, not problems to be solved. Prescott had never been suspended, never been reprimanded in writing, never faced a single consequence for any of it. He had learned over nearly 2 decades that complaints disappeared and badges didn't. His partner that morning was Officer Danny Lucero, 29, 4 years on the job. Lucero was quiet, agreeable, and had never once questioned a senior officer's judgment on a call. He followed. That was his role, and he had never been given a reason to reconsider it. When the dispatch came through at 11:45 a.m., the call was coded as a burglary in progress, possibly armed suspect, residential neighborhood. Prescott pulled the cruiser out of a gas station lot and hit the lights. Lucero checked his sidearm. Neither officer ran the address through property records. Neither checked the county assessor database, which would have shown the home had been purchased 3 weeks earlier by Denise A. Carter. They didn't look at the mailbox when they arrived, which already bore her name in neat black letters. They pulled the cruiser directly onto the front lawn, tires cutting into fresh sod, and exited with weapons drawn. Denise was standing on the front porch holding a cardboard box labeled Naomi's Books in black marker. She looked up and saw 2 officers pointing service weapons at her chest. Behind her, through the living room window, her 10-year-old daughter Naomi stood frozen, watching her mother stare down the barrels of 2 guns. Prescott shouted first. "Drop it! Hands where I can see them! Get off the porch! Now!" Denise set the box down slowly, her hands rising to shoulder height, palms open and facing forward. She kept her voice even. "Officers, my name is Judge Denise Carter. This is my home. I just moved in today. I can show you my identification." Prescott didn't pause. "Sure you are. And I'm the mayor. Step off the porch and get on the ground. Now." Denise stayed calm. "Sir, I am a federal judge with the United States District Court. My ID is in my back pocket. My daughter is inside. She's 10 years old. Please don't scare her." Prescott stepped closer, his weapon still raised. "I'm not going to ask again. On the ground." Lucero circled to her left, positioning himself behind her, cutting off any path back toward the front door. Denise lowered herself to one knee slowly, still speaking. "I'm complying. I'm not resisting. Please, my daughter is watching." Prescott holstered his weapon, grabbed her right wrist, twisted it behind her back, and drove her face first into the lawn. The impact was hard enough to press grass and dirt into the side of her face. He wrenched her other arm back and snapped the cuffs on while planting a knee between her shoulder blades. Inside the house, Naomi screamed. The sound cut through the morning air and reached every porch on the street. Neighbors stepped outside. At least 4 phones began recording. Karen Langford stood on her own porch 15 yards away, arms crossed, watching. She nodded once. Denise spoke into the grass. "My daughter is inside, alone. She's 10. Please don't frighten her. Please." Prescott didn't respond. Lucero, without a warrant, without permission, without probable cause, walked to the front door, pushed it open, and entered the home with his weapon drawn. He found Naomi crouched behind the couch, sobbing, her arms wrapped around her knees. He shouted commands at her. "Don't move. Where's anyone else? How many people are in this house?" She was 10 years old. She could barely breathe through the crying. Lucero radioed in. "Minor on the premises. No other suspects." He left her there, alone. He walked back outside to stand over Denise, while Naomi's cries echoed through the open front door for every camera and every neighbor to hear. Naomi Carter had been coloring at the kitchen table when the moving truck arrived that morning. She had helped carry 2 small boxes from the truck to her new bedroom, the one with the big window that looked out onto the backyard. Her mother had promised they would hang curtains together that afternoon. Purple ones. Naomi had picked them out herself. When the sirens hit the street, Naomi moved to the living room window. She saw the police car pull onto the grass. She saw 2 officers get out with their guns pointed at her mother. She didn't understand. Her mother was just standing on the porch holding a box. The box with Naomi's name on it. The one with her books inside. She pressed her hands against the glass. Her breath fogged the window. She couldn't move. She watched Prescott grab her mother's arm and twist it. She watched her mother go down face first into the lawn. She watched a knee press into her mother's back. That was when Naomi screamed. It was the kind of scream that doesn't stop on its own, the kind that comes from a place deeper than fear. Neighbors heard it from their porches. Cell phone recordings captured it clearly, a child's voice breaking over and over, calling for her mother. Then the front door burst open. Lucero came through it with his weapon drawn, even though the door had been unlocked the entire time. He swept the room. He found Naomi behind the couch, curled into herself, arms around her knees, face wet with tears. He pointed his weapon in her direction before lowering it. "Don't move. How many people are in this house?" She couldn't answer. She was gasping between sobs. "Mommy, I want my mommy, please." Lucero didn't kneel, didn't soften his voice, didn't explain why he was there or that her mother was okay. He keyed his radio. "Minor on premises. No other suspects found." Then he turned and walked back outside, pulling the door shut behind him. Naomi stayed behind the couch for 15 minutes. Alone. in a house she had lived in for less than 3 hours. She could hear voices outside, but not her mother's. She didn't know if her mother was hurt. She didn't know if her mother was coming back. The neighbor videos captured what the body cameras missed: the sound of a child crying through an open window, calling for a mother who was face down in handcuffs 12 feet away and not allowed to answer. Gerald Forsyth had moved to Prescott Ridge 8 years earlier after retiring from a 40-year career in civil litigation. He was 72, white-haired, and had spent most of his adult life in courtrooms. He knew what lawful procedure looked like, and he knew what he was watching from his porch was not it. He had introduced himself to Denise that morning when the moving truck arrived. They had talked for a few minutes. She mentioned she was a judge. He had helped carry a box to the porch. When the officers arrived and put her on the ground, Forsyth didn't hesitate. He walked across the lawn, steady and deliberate, and stopped 6 feet from where Prescott stood over Denise. "Officers, you are making a serious mistake." Prescott barely looked at him. "Sir, step back. This is a police matter." Forsyth didn't move. "This woman is the homeowner. Her name is on the mailbox. Her deed is inside. I have her identification right here." He held up Denise's wallet and a manila folder with the closing documents she had asked him to grab from the kitchen counter. Prescott glanced at the wallet, then back at Forsyth. "We'll handle verification. Step back." Forsyth's voice hardened. "I've known this woman for 2 hours, and I already pulled up her Senate confirmation on my phone." He held the screen up, showing a news article with Denise's photograph in the headline. "She was confirmed by the United States Senate 3 weeks ago. You are handcuffing a sitting federal judge on her own property." Prescott's jaw went slack for half a second. His eyes moved from the phone screen to Denise's face, still pressed against the grass. The photo matched. The name matched. Lucero, standing behind them, went pale. His hand dropped from his belt. For the first time since they had pulled onto the lawn, neither officer moved. Neither spoke. Forsyth lowered the phone. "I suggest you uncuff her immediately and call your supervisor before this gets worse than it already is." Prescott did not uncuff her. He did not apologize. He did not check her ID. Instead, he reached for his radio and keyed the mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 14. I need a sergeant at 4912 Wyndham Lane. Possible misidentification. Requesting guidance." Denise lay still in the grass, wrists locked behind her back, listening to the man who had just slammed her to the ground ask someone else what to do next. Sergeant Rita Bowman pulled up to 4912 Wyndham Lane 6 minutes after Prescott's radio call. She was 48, a 22-year veteran of the department, and the kind of supervisor who didn't need to raise her voice to make a room go quiet. She stepped out of her cruiser, scanned the scene, and understood immediately that something had gone very wrong. A black woman in handcuffs on a freshly sodded lawn, a moving truck in the driveway, neighbors with phones out, a child's muffled crying from inside the house. Gerald Forsyth met her halfway across the lawn, holding the wallet and the deed folder. He handed her both without a word. Bowman looked at the driver's license first, then the deed, then the news article still open on Forsyth's phone. She looked at Denise on the ground and back at Prescott. "Uncuff her, now." Prescott hesitated. "Sarge, the call said she was possibly armed." "I said uncuff her." Prescott removed the handcuffs. Denise sat up slowly, rubbing the red grooves pressed into her wrists, grass and dirt still on the side of her face. Bowman crouched in front of her. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Rita Bowman. I'm sorry, are you hurt?" "My daughter," Denise said. "She's inside, alone. She's been alone this whole time." Bowman stood, walked to the front door, and went inside. She found Naomi still behind the couch, knees pulled to her chest, face swollen from crying. Bowman sat on the floor beside her. "Your mom is okay. She's right outside. She's coming in to get you, I promise." She stayed with Naomi until Denise walked through the door 2 minutes later. Then Bowman went back outside and turned on Prescott. "What probable cause did you have? He got a burglary call. Did you verify ownership before drawing weapons? Did you check the mailbox? The moving truck has her name on the invoice taped to the door." Prescott said nothing. Bowman pulled both officers' radios and body cameras. She called the precinct captain from the driveway. The captain called the chief. The chief called the city attorney. Within the hour, the Charlotte FBI field office received a formal notification. An assault on a sitting federal judge is a federal crime. And when the DOJ Civil Rights Division opened a file that afternoon, the name on the intake form was familiar to half the office. Denise had worked there for 12 years. Federal investigators pulled the 911 recording within 24 hours. They played it back 4 times in a conference room at the Charlotte FBI field office. Every word was transcribed, time-stamped, and entered into evidence. "There's a black woman at 4912 Wyndham Lane. She's going in and out of the house. I don't think she lives here. She's acting erratic, looking around like she's casing the place. I think she might be armed. I saw something in her waistband. She doesn't belong here." Each claim was checked against the facts. Erratic behavior. Denise had been walking boxes from a moving truck to her front door in a straight line for over an hour. Possibly armed. The object in her waistband was a tape measure, visible in both body camera footage and neighbor recordings. Casing the place. She had been measuring her own door frame. She doesn't belong here. She said it twice. Investigators then pulled Karen Langford's history with the department. What they found was not a concerned citizen making a one-time mistake. It was a pattern. 14 calls to police in 3 years. Every single one about a non-white person in the neighborhood. A black landscaper working a scheduled job. A Latino FedEx driver making a delivery. A biracial couple touring a house for sale. All unfounded. All logged. All ignored. Then the HOA email surfaced. Karen had used her position as president to coordinate what investigators would later describe as a neighborhood surveillance network targeting people of color. One email to the board read plainly, "We need to protect the character of this community before it changes." Another instructed residents to report anyone who doesn't look like they live here and let the police sort it out. Federal prosecutors determined that Karen's 911 call was not a misunderstanding. It was a fabrication. A false police report designed to provoke an armed response against an unarmed black woman on her own property. Given the documented pattern of racial targeting, the U.S. Attorney's Office added a federal hate crime charge under 18 U.S.C. Section 249. Karen Langford was arrested on a Tuesday morning, walked out of the same gated entrance she had guarded so carefully, and placed in the back of a federal vehicle. Her HOA presidency was stripped that same week by an emergency board vote. Within a month, her husband filed for divorce, citing in the petition irreconcilable differences rooted in moral disagreement. Karen's attorney released a statement calling the charges an overreach. The 911 recording said otherwise. Internal Affairs opened its investigation before the sun set on Saturday. The body camera footage from both officers was pulled, time-stamped, and logged into the department's evidence system by 4 p.m. A secure copy was sent to the FBI field office by 5. The footage from Prescott's camera began in the cruiser. He and Lucero were driving to the call, lights on, sirens wailing. Prescott glanced at Lucero and grinned. "Bet you $20 it's a crackhead." Lucero laughed. The camera caught it all. The audio was clean. The timestamp was clear. When they arrived, the footage showed Prescott pulling onto the lawn without pausing at the mailbox. It showed him exiting with his weapon drawn before assessing the scene. It showed Denise standing calmly on the porch holding a cardboard box. It captured her voice, steady and clear. "Officers, my name is Judge Denise Carter. This is my home." And it captured Prescott's response. "Sure you are. And I'm the mayor." The footage continued through the takedown, Denise lowering herself voluntarily, Prescott grabbing her wrist, the twist, the shove. Her face hitting the grass, his knee on her back, her voice underneath him. "My daughter is inside. She's 10. Please don't scare her." At no point did Prescott attempt to verify her identity. At no point did he run the address. At no point did he check the deed, the mailbox, or the moving invoice taped to the front door with her full name on it. Lucero's footage confirmed the unlawful entry. No warrant, no exigent circumstances beyond his own assumption. A weapon drawn inside a home where the only occupant was a 10-year-old girl behind a couch? Internal Affairs completed its preliminary findings within 5 days. Prescott was terminated for excessive force, racial bias, failure to follow verification procedures, and conduct unbecoming an officer. His 7 prior complaints were formally reopened. Lucero was terminated for failure to intervene, unlawful entry without a warrant, and traumatizing a minor during an unjustified search. The State Law Enforcement Certification Board opened emergency decertification proceedings against both officers within the week. Neither would ever carry a badge again. Federal prosecutors convened a grand jury to weigh criminal charges: assault on a federal official, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, conspiracy. The evidence was already in hand. Their own cameras had provided it. The neighbor videos hit the internet by Saturday evening. By Sunday morning, they had been viewed over 2 million times. The image that spread fastest was a still frame pulled from Gerald Forsyth's phone. It showed Denise Carter face down on her own lawn, wrists cuffed behind her back, a white officer's knee between her shoulder blades, while a cardboard box labeled Naomi's Books lay on its side 2 feet away. The caption someone added before sharing read simply, "She's a federal judge. This is her house." That image became the front page of 4 national newspapers by Monday. Cable news ran the story on every cycle. The phrase, "She doesn't belong here," trended for 3 consecutive days. Charlotte erupted. Protests formed outside the police precinct within 48 hours. Not riots, not chaos. Organized groups of citizens holding signs and standing in silence. Teachers, attorneys, doctors, parents with their children. They didn't chant. They held printed screenshots of the body camera footage and the 911 transcript. That silence was louder than any slogan. The mayor held a press conference Monday afternoon. He called the incident deeply troubling and promised a full and transparent review. Civil rights organizations rejected the language immediately. Deeply troubling was what politicians said when they wanted to sound concerned without committing to action. They demanded structural reform, independent oversight, a complete audit of every police call made to Prescott Ridge in the past decade. Investigative reporters delivered that audit before the city could. They pulled public records and discovered that Prescott Ridge had generated 47 police calls about suspicious people of color in 5 years. Every single one was unfounded. Not a single arrest, not a single crime confirmed. 47 calls. 47 people stopped, questioned, followed, or confronted for the crime of being non-white in a wealthy neighborhood. The police chief was asked during a live interview whether he had been aware of the pattern. He hesitated for 4 seconds before answering. That pause was clipped and reshared more than the interview itself. By Wednesday, 3 city council members had publicly called for his resignation. The city attorney's office began preparing for a lawsuit it knew was coming and knew it could not win. The evidence was already public. The body cameras had made sure of that. Judge Denise Ayanna Carter recused herself from any proceeding connected to the incident before filing the lawsuit. She would not sit in judgment of her own case. She would let the system she had spent her career building do its work. Her attorneys filed the complaint in the United States District Court for the Western District of North Carolina on a Thursday morning. The defendant list was long. The City of Charlotte. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. Officer Wade Prescott. Officer Danny Lucero. Karen Langford. The Prescott Ridge Homeowners Association. The allegations filled 64 pages. Unlawful arrest, excessive force, racial profiling, Fourth Amendment violations, assault on a federal official, unlawful entry of a private residence without a warrant, intentional infliction of emotional distress on a minor, conspiracy to deprive civil rights under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, failure to train, supervise, and discipline officers with documented histories of misconduct. The section on Naomi ran 11 pages. Her therapist, Dr. Renee Whitmore, submitted a sworn declaration describing the damage. Naomi had developed recurring nightmares in which officers broke down her door. She refused to be in any room alone. She flinched at sirens. She asked her mother every morning before school whether police would come to their house again. Dr. Whitmore described it as acute trauma consistent with a child who had been made to believe her parent was being taken from her by force. She was 10 years old. The lawsuit also included a class action component. 47 people of color had been wrongfully targeted by police calls originating from Prescott Ridge over the past 5 years. Each had been stopped, questioned, detained, or forced to leave based on nothing but their appearance. Their names were added to the complaint. Their experiences were documented. They were no longer isolated incidents. They were a pattern. Discovery broke the case open further. Internal police emails showed that supervisors had been aware of the volume of calls from Prescott Ridge for years. One captain had written to a lieutenant 18 months earlier. "We're getting a lot of calls from that gated community. Same type every time. Unfounded." The lieutenant's response was 3 words: respond and document. No investigation was opened. No pattern analysis was conducted. No one asked why every single call involved a person of color. The city's legal team reviewed the body camera footage, the 911 recording, the emails, the class action filings, and the therapist's declaration. Their recommendation to the city council was unanimous and immediate. Settle. Do not take this to trial. You will not win. The settlement was reached 5 months after the lawsuit was filed. The Carter family received $1.8 million in damages. The 47 class action plaintiffs shared an additional $600,000 compensation fund, with individual amounts determined by the severity of each incident. But the money was not the center of the agreement. The mandated reforms were. The city agreed to establish an independent civilian oversight board with full investigative authority over police misconduct complaints. Mandatory verification protocols were implemented for all property-related calls, requiring officers to confirm ownership records, check identification, and make visual assessments before any use of force. Quarterly demographic audits of all police interactions would be conducted and published publicly. The entire department would undergo retraining in implicit bias, de-escalation, and constitutional rights. Body camera compliance would be enforced with a zero-tolerance policy. Any officer who failed to activate their camera during a citizen interaction would face immediate suspension. The criminal cases moved on a parallel track. A federal grand jury indicted Wade Prescott on 2 counts: deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, and assault on a federal official. The body camera footage was the prosecution's primary exhibit. His own voice, his own hands, his own knee. The jury deliberated for less than a day, guilty on both counts. The judge sentenced Prescott to 4 years in federal prison. She noted in her remarks that his record of prior complaints demonstrated a pattern the department had chosen to ignore, and that this failure had culminated in the assault of a sitting federal judge on her own property in front of her child. Danny Lucero was convicted of deprivation of rights and unlawful entry. He received 18 months. His attorney argued he had simply followed a senior officer's lead. The judge was unmoved. Following orders is not a defense when the orders are unconstitutional. Karen Langford pleaded guilty to filing a false police report and 1 count of a federal hate crime under 18 U.S.C. Section 249. Her 911 call, her history of targeting, and the HOA emails left no room for a viable defense. She was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. She became the first person in North Carolina convicted under federal hate crime statutes for a weaponized 911 call. Legal analysts called it a landmark. The precedent was set. A phone call made with the intent to provoke an armed police response against a person based on their race was not a misunderstanding. It was a crime. 1 month after the settlement, Judge Denise Ayanna Carter walked into the Charles R. Jonas Federal Building in Charlotte, wearing her judicial robes for the first time. Naomi held her hand. A U.S. Marshal opened the door to her chambers. On her desk sat a drawing Naomi had made during therapy. 2 figures holding hands in front of a house with purple curtains. Denise placed it next to her nameplate and sat down. Her first case that week was a housing discrimination complaint. A black family alleged they had been systematically excluded from a rental property based on race. Denise ruled with a precision her colleagues described as measured but unmistakable. She never referenced her own experience from the bench. She didn't need to. Naomi was still seeing Dr. Whitmore twice a week. The nightmares came less often now. She had made a friend on the street, a girl named Lily, whose family had moved in after the case made national news. They rode bikes in the cul-de-sac where the cruiser had torn up the lawn. New sod covered the tire marks. Karen Langford's house sat empty, a for sale sign in the yard, curtains drawn, no offers. The HOA was dissolved and reformed under new bylaws prohibiting discriminatory reporting. A bronze plaque was installed at the neighborhood entrance. This community welcomes all residents equally. Denise used part of the settlement to establish the Carter Justice Initiative, a nonprofit providing free legal representation to victims of racially motivated false police reports. In its first year, the foundation took on 23 cases across 3 states. She never spoke publicly about what happened on her lawn. When a reporter asked off the record how she felt, she said only this: "I didn't need them to believe I was a judge. I needed them to treat me like a citizen." That should have been enough. They tried to tell her she didn't belong. She belonged more than any of them knew. This case was brutal, but the case on the right spirals completely out of control.
Don't play games with me. You think I don't know what this is?
Sir, it's my vehicle. The registration is inside.
Yeah, I've heard that one before. Nice car, clean story. Guys like you don't just roll through here in something like this.
I'm active duty Navy. I can show you my ID.
At 7:14 a.m. at a rural gas station off Highway 9 in Coulter County, Georgia, a black man in civilian clothes stood at pump number 3, filling a black Chevy Tahoe. He wore a plain gray t-shirt, jeans, and running shoes. Nothing about him drew attention. He wasn't on the phone. He wasn't looking around. He was just pumping gas on a quiet Tuesday morning, the same way millions of Americans do every single day. The man was Senior Chief Darnell Sutton, 38 years old, an active-duty Navy SEAL with 16 years in special operations. He had spent the last 2 weeks on leave visiting his mother in Albany, and now he was driving back to Naval Station Norfolk for a scheduled debrief. His military ID was in his wallet. His registration and insurance were in the glove box. His leave papers were folded inside a manila envelope on the passenger seat. Everything was in order. None of it would matter for the next 40 minutes. A Coulter County Sheriff's cruiser pulled into the station lot and parked diagonally behind the Tahoe, blocking it in. The driver's side door opened slowly. Sheriff Dwight Hargrove stepped out. He was 52 years old, 26 years in the department, elected 3 times by a county that was 68% white and had never once questioned how he ran things. He was tall, broad, and unhurried. His hand rested on his duty belt as he walked toward the pump. His eyes were already locked on Sutton. Not on the vehicle, not on the plates, on the man. Hargrove stopped 6 feet away, feet planted wide, chin tilted up. "That your vehicle?" Sutton turned, nozzle still in hand. "Yes, sir." Hargrove didn't acknowledge the answer. He stepped past Sutton and circled the Tahoe slowly, peering through the tinted windows, running his hand along the rear door frame as if checking for something. He paused at the back, looked at the plates, then looked at Sutton again. "This vehicle matches a stolen report out of Valdosta. Black Tahoe, recent model." Sutton's expression didn't change. His voice stayed even. "I have the registration right in the glove box. I can show you." Hargrove ignored the offer entirely. He didn't ask for the registration, didn't ask for a license, didn't run the plates. Instead, he pointed at the hood. "Step away from the vehicle. Hands on the hood. Now." Sutton set the nozzle back in the pump, stepped forward, and placed both palms flat on the hood of his own car. He didn't argue. He didn't hesitate. 16 years of training had taught him to assess a situation before reacting, and right now, every instinct told him this man had already made up his mind. What Sutton didn't know yet was that 2 cameras were already recording. The gas station's exterior security system captured the lot from 2 angles in continuous, high-definition footage. And 30 feet away, parked near the air pump, a long-haul truck sat idling with a dash cam mounted on the windshield, capturing a wide-angle view of everything unfolding at pump number 3. The driver, a man named Earl Jessup, was inside the station eating a biscuit sandwich. He wouldn't learn what his camera had recorded until hours later, but when he did, that footage would change everything. Hargrove keyed his radio and called for backup. Deputy Ronnie Skaggs, 29 years old, 3 years on the job, Hargrove's hand-picked protege. Skaggs had been hired straight out of the sheriff's personal recommendation. No prior law enforcement experience, no academy honors, just a last name Hargrove knew from church, and a willingness to follow orders without asking questions. He arrived in under 4 minutes, cruiser pulling in fast, gravel popping under the tires. He stepped out and walked straight to Hargrove's side without once looking at Sutton, like a person. Together they ran the plates. The results came back clean. The Tahoe was registered to Darnell Sutton at an address in Virginia Beach, Virginia. The VIN matched. There was no stolen vehicle flag, no warrants, no alerts of any kind. The system had given them every reason to let him go. Hargrove didn't let him go. He looked at the screen on Skaggs's cruiser laptop and shook his head. Registration could be forged. These guys are sophisticated now. Clone a VIN, swap plates, drive it right across state lines. Sutton stood with his palms still flat on the hood of his own vehicle, the morning heat already warming the metal beneath his hands. He spoke without turning around. "I have my military ID and leave orders in the vehicle. I'm active duty Navy. I can show you everything right now." Hargrove stepped closer. "I don't care about military papers. You can buy a uniform at any surplus store. Doesn't mean you earned it." Skaggs laughed, a short, ugly sound that carried across the lot. Sutton said nothing. His fingers pressed harder into the hood, but he didn't move. Hargrove walked to the passenger side of the Tahoe and tried the handle. It was locked. He turned to Sutton. "Open it." Sutton kept his voice level. "I do not consent to a search. There's no probable cause." Hargrove didn't pause. He turned to Skaggs. "Open it. We've got exigent circumstances." There were no exigent circumstances. No weapon in plain view, no odor of contraband, no indication of danger. Just a clean registration, a cooperating man, and 2 officers who had already decided what they wanted to find. Skaggs used a Slim Jim from his cruiser to pop the lock. They started with the back seat. A duffel bag, zipped open and dumped across the seat. Gym clothes, toiletries, a paperback novel. Then the garment bag. Skaggs unzipped it and pulled out a set of navy dress blues, pressed and squared away, ribbons pinned in perfect order. Hargrove took the uniform from Skaggs and held it up by the hanger, turning it in the light like a prop. He looked at Skaggs with a half grin. "You ever seen a real Navy SEAL?" Skaggs glanced at Sutton, then back at the uniform. "Not one that looks like him." They both laughed. Sutton heard every word. His jaw tightened. His breathing stayed controlled. Behind the gas station counter, a young white woman named Colleen Fitch stood motionless, her phone raised to the window, recording. She had started filming the moment the second cruiser pulled in. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The camera was catching everything, the laughter, the uniform held up like a joke, and the man at the hood who had earned every ribbon on it, standing in silence while 2 men who hadn't mocked him for it. Hargrove pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt and grabbed Sutton's left wrist without warning. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Sutton turned slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "What am I being charged with?" "Suspicion of grand theft auto and possession of stolen property." Hargrove snapped the first cuff tight. "The plates came back clean," Sutton said. The VIN matches my registration. You know this vehicle isn't stolen. Hargrove yanked the second wrist back and locked the cuff. We'll sort that out at the station. Out on Highway 9, cars had begun to slow. A white minivan with a family inside drifted past at half speed, the mother in the passenger seat staring through the window, one hand over her mouth. A pickup truck pulled onto the shoulder briefly, then moved on. A man on a motorcycle slowed, looked, and kept riding. They all saw the same thing. A black man in handcuffs standing beside his own vehicle while two officers treated him like he'd committed the crime of the century. Hargrove gripped Sutton by the back of the neck and steered him toward the cruiser. When they reached the rear door, Hargrove pushed Sutton's head down hard, far harder than necessary. Sutton's shoulder caught the edge of the door frame. The impact twisted his upper body sideways, and his forehead struck the plexiglass partition inside the cruiser. A small cut opened just above his left eyebrow. A thin line of blood ran down toward his eyelid. Sutton didn't cry out, didn't flinch, didn't say a word. He sat back against the seat, hands cuffed behind him, blood slowly tracking down the side of his face, and he breathed. Slow and measured. The way he'd been trained to breathe when everything around him was falling apart. The way he breathed in rooms most people would never know existed. He waited. At the Coulter County Sheriff's Office, Sutton was processed like a man who had committed a violent felony. They took his mugshot under fluorescent lights, the cut above his eyebrow still fresh, blood dried in a thin line down his temple. They rolled his fingerprints. They confiscated his wallet, his phone, his watch, his military ID, and the manila envelope containing his leave orders. Every item was bagged, tagged, and placed in a locker behind the intake desk, as if it were evidence in a murder case. He was walked down a narrow hallway and placed in a holding cell with a concrete bench and a steel toilet. The door locked behind him with a sound that echoed off every wall. Sutton sat on the bench. I'd like to make a phone call. Hargrove stood on the other side of the bars, arms crossed. You'll get one when we're done processing. Then he walked away. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. No phone call, no water, no update, no explanation. The processing had taken less than 15 minutes. The rest was silence and concrete. Down the hall in Hargrove's office, the sheriff and his deputy sat across from each other writing their arrest report. The document they produced bore almost no resemblance to what had happened at that gas station. It stated that the subject was evasive and uncooperative during questioning. It stated that the subject made furtive movements toward the vehicle, consistent with an attempt to flee. It stated that the subject refused to provide identification and became verbally combative when asked to comply with lawful orders. Every line was a lie. Every sentence was designed to justify what the cameras had already proven was unjustifiable. And while Hargrove signed his name at the bottom of that report, the black Chevy Tahoe sat in the station's impound lot, already confirmed clean through 3 separate database checks. No stolen flag, no VIN discrepancy, no alert of any kind. Hargrove had seen the results. He had buried them. Because admitting the vehicle was clean meant admitting the arrest was wrong. And Dwight Hargrove had not admitted he was wrong in 26 years. He wasn't going to start now. After 3 hours and 47 minutes, Hargrove appeared at the holding cell door. You get one call. Sutton stood, walked to the desk phone at the end of the hallway, and dialed a number from memory. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call his mother. He called his commanding officer at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. The call lasted less than 3 minutes. Sutton spoke in short, precise sentences. He gave his name, rank, and service number. He stated his location. He described the stop, the search, the cuffs, the cut on his forehead, the fabricated charge, and the 4 hours without a phone call or water. He said, I'm being held at the Coulter County Sheriff's Office in Georgia. The vehicle is mine. The plates are clean. They know it's clean. His commanding officer, Captain Leon Briggs, asked one question. Are you injured? Small cut above my eyebrow. I'm fine. Briggs said, sit tight. We're making calls. The line went dead. Within 20 minutes, Captain Briggs had contacted NCIS, the Navy JAG Corps, and the Department of Defense Liaison for Law Enforcement Affairs. Within 40 minutes, phones were ringing at the Coulter County Sheriff's Office from numbers with Washington, D.C. area codes. The desk sergeant, a woman named Pam Gunther who had worked the front desk for 9 years, answered the first call with the same flat tone she used for noise complaints and parking disputes. She didn't understand what was happening. The voice on the line asked to speak with the officer in charge of the detention of Senior Chief Darnell Sutton. She transferred the call to Hargrove. He picked up the receiver in his office, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Sheriff Hargrove?" What he heard next straightened his spine. The voice on the other end identified themselves as a representative from the Pentagon's Office of General Counsel. The tone was not a request. It was a notification. And for the first time that morning, the confidence in Dwight Hargrove's face cracked. While Sutton sat in a holding cell staring at a concrete wall, two things happened simultaneously that he knew nothing about. The first began behind the counter of the gas station off Highway 9. Colleen Fitch, the 23-year-old attendant who had watched the entire encounter through the store window, sat in the back office during her break and opened her phone. She had recorded 4 minutes and 11 seconds of footage, starting from the moment Skaggs pulled the dress blues out of the garment bag. The video showed the uniform held up like a costume. It showed 2 officers laughing. It showed a man in handcuffs being shoved headfirst into a cruiser. She uploaded it to 3 platforms with a single caption. "Sheriff just arrested a black man for driving his own car. He's military." Within the first hour, the video had 12,000 views. By the second hour, it had crossed 40,000. Comments flooded in. Shares multiplied, local activist pages picked it up. A civil rights attorney in Atlanta reposted it with the words, "This is Coulter County. This is what they do." The second thing happened 30 miles north at a truck stop off Interstate 16. Earl Jessup, the long-haul driver who had been parked at the gas station that morning eating a biscuit sandwich, saw the video on his phone while scrolling during a fuel stop. He recognized the gas station immediately. Then he recognized the Tahoe. Then he remembered his dash cam. He pulled the footage from the device and watched it. His camera had captured the entire encounter from a wider angle, the cruiser blocking the Tahoe in, the circling, the pat-down, the search, the cuffs, the shove, all of it from a clean, unobstructed vantage point. Jessup called the local news station in Savannah. He told them what he had. They told him not to delete anything and sent a crew to meet him within the hour. By early afternoon, the Coulter County Sheriff's Office was receiving media inquiries from outlets it had never heard of, asking questions it had no answers for. And Dwight Hargrove, sitting behind his desk with a phone that wouldn't stop ringing, was beginning to realize that the quiet arrest he had made at pump number 3 was no longer quiet. Hargrove closed his office door and told Skaggs to sit down. "The video is online," he said. Skaggs had already seen it. His face was pale. Hargrove pulled up the arrest report on his computer and stared at it. The line about Sutton attempting to flee stood out now like a lit fuse. "We need to clean this up," Hargrove said. He began editing the document, softening the language, removing the claim about furtive movements, replacing verbally combative with initially uncooperative. Skaggs watched but said nothing. He didn't object. He didn't question it. He sat in the same silence he had maintained at the gas station and let Hargrove rewrite the record. When the revised version was saved, Hargrove picked up the phone and called the county attorney, Vernon Poole. He explained the situation in broad terms, downplaying the force, omitting the cut on Sutton's forehead, framing the video as misleading and out of context. Poole listened, then asked one question. "Is the vehicle stolen?" Hargrove paused. "No." "Release him," Poole said. "Right now. No further statements, no press comments, nothing. Just let him go." Hargrove pushed back. "If we release him now, it looks like we were wrong. If you hold him any longer," Poole said, his voice flat, "this becomes federal. It may already be." Hargrove hung up. He sat for a long moment, jaw working, fingers drumming the desk. Then he made one more call. He ordered the Tahoe towed from the station impound lot to a secondary facility 30 miles south in Jessup. When Sutton was finally brought out of the holding cell, Hargrove handed him a clear plastic bag containing his wallet, phone, and watch. His military ID and leave papers were inside a separate envelope. No apology, no explanation. Hargrove told him the charges were being reviewed and that his vehicle would be available for retrieval once the investigation concluded. Sutton asked where the vehicle was. Hargrove said, "Jessup, 30 miles south. You can pick it up when we're done." Sutton stood on the front steps of the Coulter County Sheriff's Office at 4:17 in the afternoon. No vehicle, no ride. A cut above his eyebrow held together by dried blood. A town he'd never been to, and no reason to trust a single person in it. He put his hands in his pockets and started walking. The next morning, 3 black SUVs pulled into the parking lot of the Coulter County Sheriff's Office. The men and women who stepped out wore no uniforms, but their credentials spoke louder than any badge in the building. 2 NCIS special agents, a Department of Defense civil rights investigator, a representative from the FBI's Civil Rights Division. They walked through the front door at 8:06 a.m. and asked to speak with Sheriff Dwight Hargrove. Pam Gunther, the desk sergeant, stared at the federal IDs laid across her counter and picked up the phone without a word. Within the first hour, the investigators had secured the gas station's exterior security footage, both angles, full resolution, time-stamped. They had Earl Jessup's dashcam footage, already preserved by the Savannah news station that had copied it the day before. They had Colleen Fitch's phone video, downloaded directly from her device with her full cooperation. And then they found what Hargrove had hoped no one would look for: 2 versions of the arrest report. The original, filed at 1:42 p.m. the previous day, claiming Sutton was evasive, uncooperative, and attempted to flee, and the amended version, saved at 3:58 p.m. just hours later, with the language softened and the fleeing claim removed. The metadata was intact. The timestamps were undeniable. An NCIS agent placed both versions side by side on Hargrove's own desk and said, "You want to explain why there are 2 of these?" Hargrove called for his attorney. The interviews that followed took the rest of the day. Colleen Fitch described what she saw from behind the counter: the stop, the search, the laughter, the uniform held up like a prop. Earl Jessup described the cruiser pulling in at an angle, blocking the Tahoe before a single word had been spoken. 2 motorists who had slowed on Highway 9 gave statements describing Sutton in cuffs, compliant and still, while Hargrove shoved him into the cruiser. 3 customers inside the gas station described hearing the exchange through the open door. Every account matched. Sutton was calm. Sutton was cooperative. Sutton never raised his voice, never resisted, never moved without being told to. The sheriff was aggressive. The sheriff was mocking. The deputy followed without question, and the 2 reports sitting on the desk confirmed what the footage already proved: that Hargrove hadn't just arrested an innocent man, he had tried to bury it afterward. The federal investigation did not stop at the gas station. It went deeper. Investigators subpoenaed 5 years of arrest records from the Coulter County Sheriff's Office. Every traffic stop, every detention, every use of force report filed under Hargrove's authority. The data analysts who reviewed the numbers didn't need long to see the pattern. It was staggering. 74% of all traffic stops personally initiated by Hargrove involved Black or Latino drivers, in a county that was 68% white. The numbers alone would have been damning, but the paper trail made it worse. Investigators pulled complaint files from storage rooms and filing cabinets in the basement of the sheriff's office. Some were in folders so old the edges had yellowed. 8 prior allegations of excessive force. 11 formal complaints of racial profiling. Every single one had been reviewed and dismissed internally, and every single one had been dismissed by Hargrove himself. As elected sheriff, he oversaw his own disciplinary process. He was the complaint department. He was the review board. He was the final word. And his final word, in every case, was that nothing had happened. Then the witnesses came forward. 3 former deputies, all of whom had left the department within the past 4 years, contacted federal investigators through an anonymous tip line. Their accounts painted a picture of a department rotting from the top. Racial slurs were common in the break room and on ride-alongs. Hargrove referred to certain neighborhoods in the county using terms no official should ever speak aloud. Deputies who pushed back or refused to participate in targeted stops were quietly reassigned to overnight shifts, denied promotions, or pressured until they resigned. One of the 3 former deputies provided something the investigators hadn't expected: a recording. It was audio from a department barbecue 2 summers earlier, captured on a phone that had been left recording on a picnic table. In the recording, Hargrove could be heard telling a joke to a circle of deputies. The joke was about a black man driving a nice car and getting pulled over for stealing it. The punchline got laughs. It was the exact scenario he had manufactured against Darnell Sutton at pump number 3. When federal investigators played that recording in a closed briefing room, no one in the room said a word. They didn't need to. The pattern wasn't just visible. It was documented, repeated, and systemic. And it had been protected for over a decade by the one man who was supposed to prevent it. A federal grand jury convened in the Southern District of Georgia. The proceedings lasted 2 days. The evidence was presented methodically. The gas station footage, the dash cam footage, Colleen Fitch's phone video, the original arrest report and the amended version with its damning metadata, the 5 years of stop data, the buried complaints, the former deputy's testimony, the barbecue recording. On the second day, the grand jury returned indictments. Sheriff Dwight Hargrove was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, conspiracy to obstruct justice for the falsified and amended arrest reports, and filing false statements in connection with a federal investigation. Deputy Ronnie Skaggs was indicted as a co-conspirator and charged with accessory to civil rights violations. He had followed every order. He had laughed at every joke. He had stood by while an innocent man was searched, cuffed, cut, and caged. The law had a name for that kind of silence. County Attorney Vernon Poole was investigated for his role in advising Hargrove during the hours between the arrest and the release. Prosecutors examined whether his instruction to release Sutton was damage control or genuine legal counsel. Poole cooperated fully, turned over phone records and emails, and provided a detailed timeline of his communications with Hargrove that afternoon. He avoided indictment, but his reputation in Coulter County would never fully recover. Hargrove posted bail and was suspended from duty pending trial. The governor's office issued a statement confirming that an interim sheriff would be appointed. 2 days later, Hargrove stood behind a podium outside the county courthouse and gave a press conference. His voice was steady, but his eyes were hard. He called the indictment a federal witch hunt driven by media pressure and political agendas. He said he had served Coulter County faithfully for 26 years and that he would be vindicated. The clip was picked up by national outlets within the hour. It went viral, but not in his favor. The comment sections filled with links to the gas station footage, screenshots of the arrest data, and quotes from the barbecue recording. Hargrove had spent 26 years controlling the narrative in Coulter County. He could not control this one. The federal trial began on a Monday morning in the Southern District of Georgia. It lasted 2.5 weeks. On the first day, prosecutors played all 3 video sources synchronized on split screens: gas station security, Earl Jessup's dashcam, Colleen Fitch's phone footage. The jury watched from 3 angles as Sutton complied with every command, while Hargrove circled, mocked, searched, and fabricated. They heard the surplus store comment. They heard Skaggs laugh. They watched Hargrove shove Sutton's head into the doorframe and saw the cut open above his eyebrow. Sutton testified on the 4th day with the precision of someone trained to deliver after-action reports. Every word, every gesture, every minute on that concrete bench. When asked why he didn't resist, he paused. because I know what happens to a black man who resists, even when he's right, especially when he's right. 3 former deputies described a department culture built on slurs and selective enforcement. A statistical expert presented the arrest data. 74% of Hargrove stops targeted black or Latino drivers in a county that was 68% white. Hargrove's defense claimed he acted on a legitimate stolen vehicle report. Prosecutors proved no such report existed in any database. The jury deliberated 5 hours. Guilty on all counts. Hargrove received 6 years. Skaggs received 2. Neither man apologized. The civil lawsuit followed. Sutton filed against Coulter County, Hargrove, and Skaggs, citing unlawful detention, excessive force, racial profiling, fabrication of evidence, and deliberate indifference. Discovery unearthed internal emails between county officials calling Hargrove's behavior a known issue, but noting he delivers results and the voters like him. The county settled for $4.2 million and entered a federal consent decree mandating independent oversight, mandatory bias training, body cameras, a civilian review board, and demographic reporting on all stops and arrests. Hargrove's name was removed from the department's wall of honor. His portrait was taken down from the courthouse lobby. No ceremony, no announcement. Just an empty hook on the wall and a faint outline where the frame had been. This case was brutal, but the case on the right spirals completely out of control.